I'm going to call the meeting of April 13th of the Canby Planning Commission to order. We'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now we'll take a moment. We're going to have a brief prayer for our meeting. If you, for those that would like to participate, that'd be great. So, Lord, thank you for bringing us all together to help guide the city of Canby in the process of planning our future and guide all of us on the Planning Commission to make wise and thoughtful choices that reflect the will of the people of Canby. In your name, amen. Okay. Has everybody had an opportunity to read the minutes of the last meeting, the meeting of March 23rd?
Yes.
May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we approve the minutes of that last meeting.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'd second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting of March 23rd, 2015. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're good to go. Okay, new business. There's no public hearing, so we'll just move directly to new business. And it is my pleasure to introduce to all of you out in the audience here, Clint, and in TV land, the throngs that are out there. I would like to introduce our new commissioner, Christine Rocha. There you are. I don't think there's any induction ceremony or secret handshake or secret decoder ring to pass on, but
That's disappointing.
I know. So welcome aboard.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much. It's a pleasure.
Now we have to appoint a new Planning Commission officers, chair and vice chair. Chair Smith is remaining on the Planning Commission, but is stepping away as chair. So in my position as vice chair, I'm going to start by nominating Mr. Sean Hensley for the position of vice chair.
And I knew how this was going to go.
You sure did, didn't you?
Second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that Mr. Sean Hensley be appointed vice chair of the Canby Planning Commission. Are there any other nominations? Okay, we'll call for the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There you go.
Can I vote against myself?
No, you may not.
Got to be acceptance, please.
Yeah.
So now we'll open the nomination process for chair.
Mr. Chair, I would like to nominate Mr. John Savory for chair of the Planning
I'll
Commission.
second that.
It's been moved and seconded that John Savory be appointed the chair of the Canby Planning Commission. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, we'll vote. All in favor of John Savory being chair of the Canby Planning Commission, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There we go. We now have a new chair and vice chair. So we're going to continue the review and recommendations for amendments to the street tree regulations ordinance number 1385, City of Canby tree planting and maintenance policy and tree list, etc. So, Brian, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I didn't really have anything per se prepared to further this. It's mainly going off your cue at the end of the last meeting that you guys were going to think about this a little more and come back. There was some discussion, I think Commissioner Surlett had talked about some consideration for protection of trees and things, and a very good idea for every community to be thinking about those things. And I did want to share with you that although I've given you this ordinance and the tree planting and maintenance guide and the recommended street tree list, we have tree requirements elsewhere in the code as well that we aren't actually looking at. And those are in Chapter 1649 of the Land Development and Planning Ordinance that has to do with site and design review. And site and design review is basically is imposed when there's any brand-new building being built on a piece of property. They're going to be subject to that, and that makes them subject to a public hearing in front of the Planning Commission. If it's an addition to the building, they can potentially get by without coming to the Planning Commission. Something less than 500 square feet. Actually, it might be 5,000. I'll have to look that up. But if you have there's a couple other criteria that trigger the things that come before the Planning Commission in that site and design review chapter. And that's the only place in the development code where it talks about landscape ordinance requirements. And so I wanted to make sure you realized that you balance these the main focus we started this was with street tree requirements. And but then we do have a landscape ordinance that applies to brand new development. And part of the relationship and the reason I'm bringing this up is that it can be very difficult to save and protect trees when a site is going from a green field into a new development. There are many, many, many cities that do a great job of kind of either requiring or incentivizing the protection of existing trees. And we've spent a lot of time in the adoption of that landscape ordinance, thinking about those issues and such, listening to our developers that work here in Canby and in the past, because when that ordinance was developed, we had sessions with them as our stakeholders trying to get what was deemed to be acceptable or not acceptable to their ideas. The idea is if they're really opposed, they're going to come to the council and the ordinance wouldn't get passed. But the general consensus has been in Canby that if you have a really good landscape ordinance for requiring brand new plantings, that you put less emphasis on trying to save what's currently there. And part of the reason is it's very difficult to build a new building and its associated parking lot and the driveways that are needed, and keep the terrain and the topography in a way that would make those trees you try to protect survive. And so there's a lot of experience, I guess, in cities that have required greater protection, and then within 2 or 3 years, the trees they protected die, and they don't survive. And so I just wanted to share that with you, that there is a relationship with requiring brand new, good landscape plans to eventually return a canopy and or otherwise good landscapings with new developments. And it's even more important if you're thinking of a brand new residential subdivision. Since we were talking street trees, if you happen to have some existing trees that are up near the street, the chances of saving those trees are practically nil, because they're going to be creating sidewalks, street widening and curbs, and all of that's going to involve bulldozers and changing the terrain and all this kind of stuff. And so the idea is important, but usually it's not very practical for them to try to save some of those existing trees. Now, a couple of those partitions that we were reviewing where we had some existing trees near the street, that may or may not be a good example in that one of those had a house already there, and so they weren't going to be doing any bulldozing or any additional work, and so any existing trees would be a really good idea to emphasize saving that. I just kind of wanted to make sure we were thinking along those lines too, and that you were aware that there's other tree regulations, so to speak.
Ryan, is that a good example of that? Would that be the when we remodeled First Avenue out here? Is that-
Right.
Yeah.
So you see all the landscaping that resulted in that, and that was part. And that one was a kind of unusual one in some aspects, in that landscaping and development of a site is usually associated with new buildings. And so when you have a redevelopment project and a new street and a parking lot without any buildings, it was a little difficult to assess exactly what kind of landscaping we were going to require and those type of things. But generally speaking, the landscape ordinance says, hey, 15% of your development site should be landscaped, and those kind of things.
So what, excuse me, so there was a project, the First Avenue project, and so the rationale for cutting down all those trees was the project itself?
There were several actual rationales on that. The foremost one was the fact that those 75-year-old maple trees were evaluated by an arborist and determined that the majority of them by far were hazardous and about ready to fall on cars. And so they said that in conjunction with the fact that they were undergrounding all of the utilities and all of the tearing out the entire area was going to force the need to do away with those just to be able to get all of those new sidewalks and underground utilities installed. It wasn't practical to try to save them, even if the decision had been made to do that, because of the extensiveness of that project of undergrounding everything. So, you know, some people, I'm sure, felt that there was a rationale because of that we just cut them down, but we started the other direction. We said, what kind of health and condition are these trees in? And we discovered that they were not at their peak. They were well along on their decline, and they weren't going to last that much longer anyway.
I went down right after they were cut down, and some of those had 4-foot holes in the center of them.
Yeah.
And there was nothing left of them. Once they cut them, they stumped them. There's huge pockets in them that they were ready to come down. So they're shelling themselves out already. So that's the other thing, you know, putting protection out for a tree, like you said, you can protect it, but how long can you keep it alive is really the question.
All right. We have in other parts of the code, we have a matrix where we encourage quality development, and we use these matrix charts. You guys probably remember the point system, and they have to achieve a certain number of points. And going above and beyond the minimum ordinance requirement for landscaping by protecting trees, we give extra points, especially if it's a grove of trees rather than one tree, because we often will protect one lone 75-foot Douglas fir and the first windstorm, and it's gone, because they survive better if you preserve them in a grove and then they don't blow over. And so we incentivize that in that matrix, and some other landscaping items are part of that as well. But preservation of trees is addressed in that matrix, encouraging people to evaluate, because if you think about it, it can take you 50 to 75 years to get the value of a brand new tree that you plant compared to a 75-year-old tree. I mean, you have to wait 75 years before you have a balance in that. So the landscape ordinance says you're going to plant several new trees to try to replace that one existing, is the idea. And even at that, it's not a balance for many, many years. But it's one that recognizes how difficult it is in a greenfield site to develop it and actually save the existing trees. The best way to save trees is to utilize one of the primary reasons you utilize a planned unit development process is to think of a site that's going to be developed, and is there wetlands on it, or is there a beautiful grove of trees? And you can decide up front, let's cluster the same density and number of units or square footage we're going to allow you to have on the site as if you wiped it clear, but let's cluster it and put it all over here and make that decision up front. We're going to save some natural resources. In order to do that, sometimes you have to bend some of our rules for setbacks and the standard development processes, and that's why we use PUDs oftentimes, is so that you can vary the rules that are normal in order to evaluate other important aspects that should be considered with development, such as saving natural resources and things. And so that's a tool that we have to use as well on that line. So that was just one comment that I know you made in the last meeting, so I wanted to talk about that. There was some pretty generalized agreement on the exceptions that were proposed before. There was the main disagreement. What was that? It talked about the number. I have to find it here again because I can't remember now. Number 4 of what was proposed. Let me see if I can find my staff report so I can.
I think that was mine, Brian.
Yep.
There's the last sentence in number 4 and the exceptions on
last
page 2 of 34.
It's talking about providing an exception to new street trees when you're developing a vacant or partially developed property. When there's existing trees, and then we mentioned whose proximity to the public street is within the bounds of the usual considered street tree area. And then I mentioned, and whose species were on the official street tree list. And I think that's probably where Commissioner Hensley had the greatest concern.
That's where I got hung up, because to me that sounds, and actually I think that Mr. Surlett might even be in with me on this one too, that to me that says, okay, if you've got a tree in this area, great, we can leave it there, but that last sentence to me says, unless it's not on the street tree list. So if it's not on the street tree list, we got to take it out and we got to put a different one there.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if the tree's there, the tree's there.
All right.
Why are we going to take it out so we can put a new one there?
All right, just
was where I
replace the
was.
species.
Yeah, where I went with it, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, I understand that we want to try and go to this list because the list was built, and they put a lot of work into that list of what the trees were, why that they wanted them, what they did, specifically what they looked like. But if you already have an existing tree, I don't see any reason to take it out. You've got something already established there. You're not going to have to put a tree back there that's going to have to try and get established and may not establish itself. So that's where I went on that. So I would prefer to lose just that last part of the sentence. I think the rest of it's fine, and I did like the exceptions. It was really pointed to what we've ran into over the last couple of months.
Then after that, I heard basically the commission say that let's look at the rest of the provisions in the ordinance, just kind of in a general basis, and see if there's any other things that you've encountered or remember that might be something that we want to talk about or ask questions about. It might be of issue, and I think as our new chair had mentioned, there's a lot of stuff here. And but it's most of it was existing and has been existing for many, many years, and so that was one of the reasons of showing you the existing ordinance before the latest ordinance in 2013 was adopted, just so you realize that we didn't adopt all this stuff. It's been ordinance for 20 or 30 years, most of it. It was just some substantial changes that we made in 2013, mainly focused on the street tree issue, is what was changed.
I did have some concerns about the city forester and the tree committee. So we currently do not have the city forester, is that correct?
That's right.
And we don't have the likely prospect of a city forester until such time as there's money in the budget for one. Would that also be a...
That's correct.
Yeah.
What we generally do with an ordinances is that you either indicate the city administrator and his designee or something like that, and so then you're not talking about some specific, because I could cite probably 6 or 7 things in the entire city code. Talks about public works directors responsible for this, 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 this. We still have all sorts of citations about the building official is responsible for this, this, and this. We haven't had a building official since December of 2011. We've got citations about superintendent of utilities or something that's never existed or something that are in the code.
So are you saying, and the likelihood is that we're not going to have a city forester
That's right.
or any of those other...
Right.
So are you saying that it's probably up to the city council at that particular juncture to clean this up?
Well, no, that is, there's one easy fix rather than totally deleting sections or something if they have value, is simply to change that reference to an actual city forester or arborist and substitute either, a generic person that we know we're always going to have, which is a city manager and his designee, instead of referring to an arborist or a city forester.
It actually says the director of public works or his authorized agent shall serve as a city forester.
Yeah.
So,
And actually, the reason I was going even higher than that is we haven't had a public works director
Right.
for 4 years.
Right.
So see, that's a problem too.
Probably going to have an administrator, we think.
another thing it says in here is the tree committee is the same as the site and design review board.
I saw that one too. I thought that was interesting. Does that make us the
Yeah.
tree committee?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to think here. What I'm kind of thinking of is in the ordinance, it talks about a site and design review committee that is pages and pages in the code, talks about setting up this site and design committee, but it is, in fact, you guys. And it's said in a way that we didn't have to do it. It kind of was aiming at that point in time the ordinance was created. We realized, I wasn't here, but that there are other communities in the nearby area that actually have site and design review committees that are totally separate. And they basically review development projects, whereas the Planning Commission is more just the long-range plans and those kind of issues and comprehensive plan changes and those things. And so that's another common model. In a smaller community with less activity and staff, it hasn't panned out for us to try. In fact, we're having trouble finding enough planning commissioners. So it hasn't panned out to have separate site and design review committees.
We're only short one commissioner now, Brian. It's,
Yeah, no kidding.
it's a process, and got a pretty solid group here, I think. So, anything else that you would like to?
No, I didn't really have anything prepared for you. It's just going to kind of listen and help explain or respond to any other things that you might have.
I talked to Jamie about it, the Historical Review Board meeting, and did she chat with you on the subject? Did she have any input? Or?
She did not visit with me
Oh, okay.
before this meeting.
Okay.
John, did you have anything else that you would like to?
Well, my only concern is that not so much new developments. I think we've pretty well got that covered, and I think the intent is there to preserve existing trees when it's all possible. But for example, in Waite Park, if we were to take down an old tree due to disease or damage, there's where I would like to see have a new tree replaced, to replace the old one. On, public property, not
Sure.
private.
I thought that was already, isn't that already a requirement?
Well, I think we talked about that last time, that it's a practice and a policy, but I'm not sure that we actually have a wording anywhere in the tree planting maintenance that says if you need to get if it's determined to be a street tree, you have to get a permit to have it removed. That causes a public works staff person to come out and look at your explanation as to why you want to remove it, look at the health of the tree, look at whatever hazard or damage it's causing, because those are the two primary reasons people use to cut down a tree. Occasionally we have one because it's blocking my view, or I think it's ugly, or I don't like trees. So we get those reasons too. But most of the time, there is an obvious buckling of the sidewalk, damage being caused to the street, or it's about ready to do that because there's one just down next door that has already done that, and this one's starting, and so they want to cut it down before that damage occurs. And you can understand why homeowners want to do that and call quite frequently, because they're responsible for the maintenance of that tree and the damage it causes. And so, unfortunately, we get more requests than we would really want when there are trees that were just 10 years earlier planted by a developer, required by our ordinance to be placed there. And that's one of the reasons the emphasis on the new street tree list is to try to find those trees that are the best, that would do the least damage. But any tree still has that potential of causing damage over time, and that's a balance that a community just lives with. You're either treeless or you recognize there's going to always be some damage in the long term from planting trees.
So you were saying that there is a policy?
But there is a policy, yeah, but it's kind of a flexible one, and the fact that what they do is they say, we try to ask each one of them when they agree to remove it, that can you replace another one in your yard? But that's not always possible. There's not the width of their yard, or there's a driveway too close to where it was, or you'd be putting it right back where the stump is of that one. And so then the next thing they say, well, would you agree to plant another tree on your property in the backyard or something? At least we'd still have a tree canopy in the community. We wouldn't have a street tree. And that works sometimes. And then there's some instances where the property owner simply doesn't want another tree in their yard, and then they'll ask them if they would contribute to a tree in one of our city parks. So
What about for city property? Is there?
Yeah, so they have had a practice, but it was primarily the arborist that was doing this, that we don't have now, of knowing in our parks and stuff where we would like to have a tree planted, and then using that as an opportunity to kind of press that policy that, we really expect you to replace it because it was a required tree to begin with, and now we're going to let you remove it, and it's not dead yet, so we'd like you to replace it. And so we could try to find a place in the code to make that a little more formal, and so people could read in our standards, would see that, and we wouldn't have to just explain that's been our administrative policy through the permitting process. We could put it in the code somehow or other, find a place for it.
Personally, I'm in favor of the most flexibility possible. Once it's in the code, then it becomes less flexible.
That's true.
John, you have Anything else you'd like to? Mr. Hensley?
I did find a couple things that I more cleanup than anything else. One that kind of bothered me was page 10 of 34. It's in the service orders. That I thought it was interesting that the ways that someone can, a property owner can be notified. And I wanted everybody to look at these because I found it kind of interesting that the way that it states, it says that you can be notified by one of the following. One of the following, number 5, is to publish something in the Canby Herald. I think that the 12 people that actually read that paper aren't going to maybe know where that tree is or what needs to be done to it. So I'd kind of like to get that taken out of there because I think that notifying somebody that this is an issue is great, but if we're using a local newspaper to be able to notify somebody, I think that's not necessarily the way we need to do it. I mean, you can mail them something, you can put a door hanger on their door or something like that, but especially with the, pretty soon we'll be putting it on their Facebook or something, and think that that's all right. So from there, there's a couple little cleanup things that I think could be looked at or not. The rest of it looks pretty decent. I did notice the tree committee also. I thought that was interesting that we were the tree committee.
I like trees.
I like trees too.
Good.
Make good bonfires, and we like them for different reasons.
Which page was that on?
That was
Because
on-
I'm confused when you said your page numbers. 'Cause
See,
I've got-
my
10 of 34. It's
I don't
in
have-
section
How about 14 of
123290.
43? How about 14 of 43?
How about that?
14 of 43 would make sense, because I have 43. I
I
don't
thought the
have
same thing you
the...
had, Sean. The
See,
10
we-
and 34
We have two different
page numbers.
page number things up here.
Laney was really excited.
She was excited about Garth Brooks.
I got to get these together and get out of here.
We're going to call it the Garth Brooks syndrome. We'll chastise her properly next time.
It's in 1232 of 90.
Okay.
So it's that last line there, number 5. I just thought that was interesting that this is an acceptable notification. There are some references to private property also in the in that same section, and in 1232-80 that I was a little confused by, stating that, what was it here? So planted upon public or private property, so the forester can come in and tell someone on their private property, is what I was understanding with that something needed to be done with the tree. So is that because of it's affecting something on public property?
Well, to some degree, it's the idea that it goes back, I don't know whether it's stated very clearly or not in the purpose statements or something of the ordinances. It has to do with the fact of how you're talking about one of the importance of a tree ordinance is to have trees in the urban environment. So it's the canopy that provides all of the benefits that trees provide mankind are just important in the urban environment as they are out in a forest. And so it's trying to incorporate some of that and keep it when you can, and when you can't, have new landscaping that results in more trees and street tree programs so that you can create an urban canopy. And they're living things that are subject to disease. And so that's one of the reasons they promote a variety of species, because if you plant the same tree year after year on every single street and you get the Dutch elm disease, as the Midwest got about 40 years ago, it wiped out every tree in every town in about 6 states, and there were no trees left in the Midwest. And so they've all recovered from that, and they've recovered smarter now because they have a variety of trees they plant. And so this has to do with the fact that the disease doesn't recognize whether it's public or private property. And if you have a neighbor that prizes his beautiful trees on his property, and he just knows that that Dutch elm beetle that's on this neighbor's tree that's about killing it is going to hop over to yours if he doesn't do something about it, it gives the city that authority to go in and try to, I haven't looked at that part that closely, but to remedy and help protect the rest of the tree canopy and on private property as well. And it's also a matter of trees often hang over other people's property boundaries. If that tree is dead or dying or has already died, they can force the property owner to remove it so it doesn't fall on the neighbor's house. And so that's what it's there for, both disease and hazardous trees that the property owner isn't paying attention to, doesn't think about it, and to allow the city to go in and force that correction.
Is that explained in greater detail somewhere else? I mean, exactly what you just said, because I don't see that.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's that clear, but it's...
Because otherwise that could leave the impression that, you know, the city forester, if he was, you know, had evil intent
Right.
on his neighbor or somebody else in the community, could go in there and just ordered to have his tree removed.
My
Since that's
understanding is
ours.
it's clear that that's what the purpose is we could look at it a little closer to see if there's any additional wording that would emphasize that private property hazardous trees and/or dead and dying that might risk, you know, the rest of the city's tree canopy that we work so hard on, you know. But that's the reason that's any private provisions are in this code, is for those two reasons.
I would think that would be necessary for the protection of the city, quite frankly, as well as the citizen. That there should be a little more detail
There's a,
given as to why, under what circumstances the city could come in
yeah,
and cut down or spray or whatever it might be on private property for, you know, a tree.
because the majority of this talks about the public trees and such,
Right.
but on section 12.32070, it talks about the circumstances under which the city could provide notice. And it talks about property that's infected with disease or infested with damaging insects or otherwise presents imminent risk of personal injury or to property damage or threatens the health of other trees. The city shall inform the budding property owner who's responsible for maintenance of the trees of their obligation to take appropriate measures under the city's tree planting and maintenance policy to limit or remove the risk. So that's basically the paragraph I was talking about
Okay.
that's in there. And kind of trying to narrow that that's the only reason we would be looking at whatever someone would do on their own private property. And yeah, it has some potential, could have some potential concerns, but I think probably if you really value the benefit that trees offer a community, then a truly good tree policy should have something like this in there, because the majority of trees are not street trees. They're private property trees. And if you don't have some mechanism of helping to protect them, then you're fighting an uphill battle if all you're protecting is your street trees.
Sure.
And that only says public right of way.
The other interesting fact to add to this, of course, though, is because we don't have a city forester and limited staff, the chance that we're going to be out there inspecting private property isn't very great. It's going to be a complaint-driven basis like most code enforcement is in most cities, and especially in Canby. And then you have this to utilize if you really need to, if you have a dire situation between two neighbors or something, and they point out that there's dead and dying, diseased and hazardous trees, then you have a resolution, an ability to correct it.
But that says the city may act on notice of any tree within the public right of way or in the city or on city property. It doesn't say anything about private property.
I guess you're right there. Yeah, I thought maybe that had the private property on it, but I guess you're right. I don't see that on there. So that's what we're talking about is there a similar
And that's the ordinance.
direction that
needs
applies to
have
private
property.
that applies to private property or not? And that, I can't tell you right now without looking through it real closely again. And because when it talks about the service of orders, it talks about private property as well. There are plenty of private trees that are near the sidewalks or public right-of-way that become hazardous, and the city has to go out and either trim them or put a notice on the private property owner's door or whatever, and however they've done it in the past. Public Works has done it to tell them that it's their responsibility to get those limbs trimmed so they don't hit the trucks going by on the street, or that there's half the tree is dead and they need to cut it down before it falls on the car that might park in the parallel parking space under it.
So if the homeowner ignores that, or the property owner ignores that, and the city goes out and does the trimming themselves, can I safely assume that the property owner is billed for that service?
Yeah, they either bill them or they put a lien on their property. It's pretty standard practice for cities to create liens on their property because oftentimes they don't pay. And so the only way we can have any recourse is to put a lien on the property.
Anything else, Mr. Hensley?
I think that's it for the moment.
Ms. Rocha, I know that you've spent hours and hours poring over this, word by word. You've committed it to memory.
I'm just absorbing right now.
Absorbing, okay.
I do have a question, if I may, on the
Sure.
process. So what's happening here is we're updating the city code on the trees. So is staff writing the recommendations for the updates and then we're reviewing them, or
Right.
is this?
That previous planning commission meeting, we made a quick and dirty response as to how we would change the ordinance from the experience that this planning commission has had over the past year with some of the applications that have come in. And what's missing right now is an actual formal situation where you would come in with the existing code and you would show exactly what line you're adding and what line you're crossing out. And we have not done that yet. We just brought the ideas to see whether you were actually interested in changing the ordinance or not. And we seem to have gotten some indication that, yeah, I think maybe we'd like to see you do that. And so we would have to go back then and do that. And we also have to notify the state whenever we change our code. Requirements to do that because it's a land development. Actually, part of this isn't. So we could actually make changes here without notifying the state because this isn't in the land development code. We usually aren't changing things that aren't in the land development code, but this, you guys have a broad purview over lots of issues, so.
So, yeah, especially now that we're the city forester and the site and design review committee and the tree
And a tree
committee.
committee, too.
Good raise.
That's right.
A lot of hats.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Larry, do you have anything that you would like to discuss or review on this?
No, not really.
So, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the only thing that I heard that we want to definitely take out of the new, what you proposed was number 5, the publishing a copy of the order in the Canby Herald once a week for 2 successive weeks.
I find it kind of comical, but yeah, I'd like to see it gone. I don't think it needs to be there with the other 4. I mean, the thing that I saw with that is it gives an option of doing that instead of the other 4, which is what should be done. So,
Well, it's kind of on that same mindset. It's like when you drive into Portland, you enter the city limits and it says photo radar, so that way they don't have to post it at every place they do. It's just kind of a catch-all to legality to skirt the real issue.
Well, I know that sometimes there's a legal obligation to put it in the Herald, but if this is just a method of reaching an individual, then that's a very old school way to do it.
Right.
Very historical
Exactly.
way to do it, and maybe it's time to update that.
And that's why it's probably there. It legally, for many other types
Right.
of things, that's how the standard practice is and has always been, and so they put that in here as an option. I'm sure there's no reason it has to be there.
I'm sure that those would be the 2 weeks that I would be on vacation and I would miss the whole darn thing. Anything else? So, Brian, what is our next step at this point? I mean, without,
Well, if you want to direct staff to actually draw up a formal text amendment to this section of the city code that this ordinance 1385 created, we can do that, taking into account if there's a location to insert, we'll try to figure out the best location to insert the new exception section that we've created. It's still possible it might fit best in the tree planting and maintenance policy, but that was adopted by ordinance too. But and because of that, I think would result in a change in, we'd have to adopt it by a new ordinance, And so the end result of a text amendment is going to be a recommendation from you to the city council to adopt a new ordinance that has some changes in it.
so we can do that after the staff goes through that and,
Right.
yeah.
And if we don't have any more response on what you want changed than we got here tonight, it shouldn't be too difficult for us to, as soon as we figure out where we're going to put it, then we can bring it back and then you'll act formally on
Sure.
a text amendment and make a recommendation so it can go forward to the council for a new ordinance.
do you see this affecting 1649 in any way, Brian? I mean, are you having to look between the two, or is it?
Nope, I don't think there's, I just want you to know there's some relationship, but I don't see it affecting it.
Okay.
I really don't.
So why don't are we all in favor of having the staff take that next step?
Yeah, I'd like something formal to look at and make sure that.
Okay, we don't need a vote on that, do we, Brian?
Just a general consensus, so it's on the record that you've directed staff to go ahead and develop a formal text amendment.
Do we have that general
Yeah, I think
consensus?
so.
Okay,
Yes.
there you go. So, items of interest, report from staff.
I might just give you a really quick thing. A few things have been remind you that there was an invitation from the city council that you attend the council meeting this Wednesday, because they're going to be getting basically just a status report on the North Redwood Master Plan. And so that would be an opportunity, if you want to hear that presentation. Otherwise, I did try to email, I don't know if you all got it or not, but the memorandums that the consultants have developed so far that talk about existing conditions and all the background information that they need to be able to make good planning alternative decisions here down the road. But we're at the critical point now where they're going to start actually trying to figure out how they're going to propose the concept plan by all the information that they gathered. And so that's what the purpose of that is at the city council meeting. Development-wise, we have application for Hope Village that should be coming in soon to build 12 dwelling units, 6 duplexes on a single property across from their campus down on First Street. We're expecting a new application this week for a residential subdivision that will be called Franz, I guess it's Franz subdivision or Franz addition or something, for 19 lots on the parcel on North Pine that was annexed this past year by the voters. And just north of that 5 acres is currently under development as Pine Meadows, and it's going to be the same developer on both of those 5-acre tracts. We heard last week some indication that McDonald's is moving forward within a couple weeks for a building permit to the redevelopment on their site. And it's good because technically their site and design approval expires at the end of May. So I hope they get their act together and get that project moving. My understanding is they're probably working for timing with school being in and out and that kind of thing. And so we'll work with them on that because I think there's some advantages there since so many high school kids go to McDonald's is maybe they're trying to wait until school's out, because I know a year ago that's what they were thinking of doing.
And I see that the White Tin Restaurant is no more.
That's right.
So,
And so they have a pre-construction meeting tomorrow with us, and then shortly after that they'll be getting their building permit issued for that project. And I don't know, that's the main things I think we've been working on. We are coming to a culmination soon this week on the selling of city properties in this entire block and the new proposals for development. We're finishing those, listening to the proposals today and tomorrow, and then the council's going to talk about them at a work session on Wednesday. So,
that's exciting.
yeah, progress on that as well.
So our next scheduled meeting is April 27th.
Oh, before we get too far, could you explain this on 7A, Cup 15-01, detached garage and accessory dwelling above the unit? Just a brief.
Yeah. Basically, the important part of that is it's a conditional use application because they're proposing a detached accessory dwelling. And that's an application that you had before you not that long ago. The only difference in this one is it's not just the dwelling unit, it's a dwelling unit on top of a new garage as well. That's the only difference, and it happens to be near the downtown area. but it's because of the conditional use permit requirement that it's coming before you.
Is
It
this
should
in an
be very
R1
similar.
area, or do you know?
It's, pardon?
Is this in an R1 zoned
No, I
area?
believe, I'm having trouble remembering now.
Oh, that's fine.
I think it's in an R2 zoned area. If not, there's R2 zoning right around and near it. I can't remember right now for sure.
Okay. Anything else? Mr. Hensley?
No, sir.
Mr. Oakshire? Okay. Have a motion to adjourn?
I would move that we adjourn for the evening.
Have a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. We adjourn. We are